by Skynance, I guess in 2002, and it was a Lattice script, and they had wanted to make it, and we're looking for a director.
So, what was the first conversations you had with Zach that maybe further developed the screenplay in the direction that you took it?
Well, I mean, when I first read it, at first I said no, actually, to it.
Oh.
And then I said yes for the same reason I said no.
Which was?
When I read it, I was like, I've never seen anything like this before. This doesn't fit any really structure that I have understood in movies. It mixes so many genres. And then the more I thought about it, I started thinking, isn't that what's cool about it? Especially at the budget level that they were willing to spend. And I started to really get excited about the idea of doing something very unusual and taking a big swing. And I liked how, not just the fact that it was mixing, the way I describe the movie is it's a romantic sci-fi action horror political thriller. And it's also a drive-in movie. It's like it's about having a good time in a way. And then I started to feel like isn't this kind of big budget movie that we want? It's not IP, it's not a franchise, it's not a sequel. And the only problem I had with the initial script was that what was in the Gorge, for me, kind of felt like a zombie movie. It was pretty much kind of turning into a zombie movie. So a lot of the work that I did on the script was in that section of the Gorge, trying to create a more unusual mythology that was worthy of the unusualness of the structure of the script that he had written. And he was very supportive of that.
This is definitely a big swing in the sense that everything you just said about how it blends so many genres, but that's the thing is that on one hand it's a blend, on the other hand it's like a shifting of tones because the whole bit is a long stretch, obviously, where there's no dialogue, they're across the gorge from each other, and just like when I was watching it the first time, like, okay, I get it, this is a total metaphor for the lockdown, and then
And Zach wrote it during lockdown. So, that loneliness that is just emanating from the pages as I read it was, his experience at that time. And also, right after that, I had fallen in love and gotten married.
Oh, there you go.
So, when I read it, I was like, oh, this is my whole experience in the last couple of years. So, that was another big part of the draw for me.
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right, cool. What I love is that even separated, with no dialogue across the board from each other, Miles Teller and Maggie Taylor Joy have great chemistry together.
They do.
They really do.
Yeah.
Across that way. How did you come to cast the two of them?
The first box you gotta check is do you buy in the snipers. So I started with Annie. I was like, yeah, Lithuanian sniper, check. And Miles, has a lot of friends and family in the military, and I just thought he could pull that off, and I believe him in that role too. But I looked at, I knew Annie's work pretty well. I think I'd seen everything she'd been in, and then I went and watched a lot of Miles movies that I hadn't seen, and both of them are just very nuanced actors in scenes of intimacy. They really are very creative in the way they play, not just romantically intimate, but just sort of scenes with weight to them. And I started to think, boy, they're both so good at it. I think if they get together, they'll have nice chemistry, and I just got lucky they did.
Well, how about Sigourney Weaver? She's a legend.
Yeah, she's great, man. The thing I can say about Sigourney, she's everything you hope she'd be, And so, she's such an icon, and of course, you cast her in a sci-fi movie, you get instant sci-fi cred, so that was just when they asked me who you want for this role, I said, well, Sigourney Weaver, but I doubt she'll do it. And she read the script, and she is as dedicated, hardworking, disciplined an actor as I've ever worked with, right? Even at her age, with all the things she's done under her belt, super warm to the crew, she's wonderful. When we first Zoomed about the role, she had read the script, they said she was interested, she wanted to talk to me, and she said, I want you to tell me who you think Bartholomew is. And I said, well, she's not an arch villain. I said, these people who are in these positions of, in this case, a big corporation doing, this kind of, ultimately, I think, wildly misguided, wildly unethical research, they believe they're doing right. They believe they're doing it for a greater good. They think that they're serving a greater cause, but they're mistaken. I said, as long as you don't play it as a knowingly evil act, I think that's the only way the world can work. She goes, okay, I'll do it. And she just wanted to hear that was where I was coming from. I didn't want a villain. I wanted a character who believed in what she was doing, and it gave her pains, I think, to kill off these soldiers the way that she did, but she was doing in a misguided way what she thought was right.
Back to Anya Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller. I mean, both of them just have such great filmography separately, but they also obviously have a lot of experience making action films. Anya Taylor-Joy with Nats, and then of course Top Gun Maverick. So how did that help them when it came to the stunt training and the weapons training?
The weapons training they put a lot of time into, and they both just wanted to do all their own stunts. I think they did everything that I would let them do. I would always have conversations with the stunt coordinator, like, how dangerous is this? So that I ultimately had to sometimes be the decider, like, I can't risk you doing this, but they would do anything that we would let them do, basically. And so, that whole scene where we're pulling that Jeep up the wall toward the end, we're really pulling the Jeep up the wall. And everything that they're doing, they're on cables, but they're up there vertically with all these stunt actors, doing all that stuff themselves. And I think it was exhausting, but, ultimately rewarding for them to do that.
What was it like filming the scenes where they're separated? Did you film like maybe all of Miles' scenes first, or all of Hanning's first, or how?
It was a little bit of mix and match, but I think we mostly filmed Miles first. I was hoping the big sets, the towers we built, like the top third of the tower, so each stage had a tower in it, so it's really to scale. When they're up on the balconies, they're 30, 40 feet in the air. There was just no way to get the other actor into any kind of view where they could interact with them. So I mostly shot them separate, and sometimes I would do a week at a time. So I, say Anya, last Tuesday when I was shooting Miles, he did this really funny thing, and I described it to her, or show a clip of it, and then she would react to it. So it was probably the most challenging part of the movie, both technically and I would imagine performance-wise, because everything that they're doing in a vacuum, and I'm trying to figure out. I remember when I first started shooting it, I didn't, I storyboarded a lot. I didn't storyboard any of that. I was like, it's a two-person scene. And then when I started shooting, I was like, God, they gotta write the cards, and they gotta turn around, and then they gotta look through the thing, and they gotta do that like 15 times. How do you not make this boring? So it technically became a very tedious process to figure out how to do that without it getting boring. But what makes it interesting are them. And, Anya, I've worked with a lot of big actresses, like Oscar winners, the creativity of the things she would do, like even shooting those scenes, I would just constantly roll the camera and be like, oh, it's wonderful. It's so much better than what I had in mind. And that's what you want from actors. If you cast well, you are always hoping that they'll surprise you with and acting is choices. And they both have incredible instinct to make interesting choices when the majority of actors wouldn't.
So the scene where they finally get together, and boy was that a commute. What was that filming that scene like?
When they first meet?
Yeah, they first meet.
It was really wonderful. It was really, you could feel I laughed a lot. I thought that Miles was really wonderfully funky and awkward, and the only thing I had done was I told them to pace it out, to sort of move toward each other slowly, and the rest of it was just sort of them doing what they do, doing what good actors do. I remember, again, Anya filming that last moment where she sort of rolls her eyes and swoons off. It was wonderful, that wasn't anything but her. But it was, you could feel the energy even on the set, because I think up to that point we had only shot them separately, because we really did shoot out most of the upper board stuff, and that became a section of the movie, and then we started shooting all the action.
When I was watching the film for the first time, there were so many things that struck me, particularly when it came to cinematography. So can you talk about the collaboration that you had with your cinematographer, but also the production designer?
They're two of the best. Rick Heinrich, Oscar-winning production designer. I told him from the beginning that I really wanted to avoid as much CGI work as possible in terms of locations and sets. And so most of what you see is, almost all of what you see in the movie is either a real location, the exteriors at the end, and the quadcopters and all that stuff. But almost everything in the gorge are big sets with CG extensions, and that's Rick loves that. And he came up with a lot of the specific designs of that. And Dan Mousen, who has shot the last couple of Guillermo del Toro movies, Shape of Water, just shot Frankenstein, and also shot the John Wick sequels. He's a really accomplished DP and an old curmudgeon. He's so great. I loved him. He was just so fun. But he got very excited about the visual design of the movie, especially when I talked to him about the kind of Italian horror look of the gorge, these audacious colors and colored mist. We did a lot of testing. But it's very hard to saturate a set with that kind of atmosphere and color and do something that bananas and still have human faces and not have it all turned into a cartoon. And he was very disciplined and specific about doing that.
You talked about the design of like the Hollow Man and all the mutated soldiers.
Yeah, that was a big part of what I had tried to come up with in the writing was, again, I didn't want them to be zombies, and the big inspiration really was going back to like folk horror, and the idea of plant people and stickmen and sentient trees, and of course there's some of that in Lord of the Rings. My friend David Bruckner made a great movie called The Ritual with his tree monster at the end. It's amazing. But there's not, I'll let little applause out here. It's a terrific movie. And but that's an amazing monster in that film, and you don't see that mythology in horror cinema the way you do in horror literature. If you go back far enough, there's Day of the Triffids and a few things like that. But I thought that was really interesting, and it was a jumping off place. And then it was just, you come up with, you have so many individual Hollow Men that you have to do the work. You have to start with 100 pieces of concept art, and pick 2 that you like, and then you build up to 10 that you like, and then you eventually have a number. And then the concept guys are so funny, they give them names like Wilbur and Thurman. Every one of those guys has a weird name. But the challenge of it and the idea of it was, when I read the script, this is what I felt about the movies. I thought that Zach's script had something really sublime going on between these two, isolated people and what it said about COVID. And I just remember that period in my life, and I remember I kept, during that very specific period before I got the script, I was often thinking about this Heidegger quote that says, longing, longing is the agony of the nearness of the distant. And I was just, every time I think about it, I'd be like, oh. And that was like COVID, and that was, the divorce that I went through, was just so much loneliness. And I felt that in those pages. And I thought that the script then had this promise of this thing in the gorge that I got so excited when I read it. I was like, oh, this better be good. And so I think the ambition of it was, when we go down there, at the very least, people need to see some things they haven't seen before. We got to show them some things that are at least not typical and not, can't be 100% original, but I'm going to try. And that was always the goal for all that concept work. And like the body web on the bridge, I'm very proud of, because that was, that was the utilization of bodies. Those were grown bodies. It was like a plant vine. It was growing up with human, appendages. And I was like, well, this is where you're getting into messing with God, and one of the reasons the gorge had to be destroyed. So, but again, everything I'm talking about is like good drive-in stuff, This is like a good exploitation movie at a very high budget level, which is, again, maybe the kind of movie I most want to see.
Well, also certainly the commitment that the cast does. It's good, particularly the two of them. When it came to their look, their hair, their makeup, their wardrobe, how much of a say did Miles and how you have in their look?
That's always an interesting question for me, because I think that actors, I think the job of a director is to be, as best you can, to be a psychologist, not in a pandering way, but try to understand each actor individually, because they're all different. They're big emotional engines. They sort of meet the world with their emotional bumper first. They can't help it. And so your job is to pay attention to things like that, What's going to make them feel free to be the character? I can't imagine in a situation like that saying, hey, I want you to have this kind of hair. I asked her about the character, and I just asked her what kind, and she brought me pictures. She was like, what about something like this? And it's pretty much what you see up there. I don't think I really made many changes. She had a very specific idea. I thought it was great. I thought it fit the character. And same with Miles, same with their wardrobe. I trust them working with the hair person, the costume person. If something doesn't work, I'll say so.
Yeah.
But it's very important for your actors to feel comfortable in their own skin, the costumes you give them, the hair you give them, all that sort of stuff.
When I was watching the film, especially tonight, I was like trying to sort of see if I could spot where the practical part of the sets or the exteriors sort of ended, and then sort of visual effects, especially before they go into the gorge, and I couldn't tell, which obviously is a good thing, but also tell me about the Cyclops augmented reality system that you use to make this.
Yeah, the scale of the movie is actually in the first half. Even though it's the most intimate part of the movie, it's the biggest part of the movie in terms of scale because of the gorge itself. And I like the idea of that being the case. And then when we go into the gorge, it becomes much more claustrophobic. When you surround a set with mists, it actually contracts. It becomes visibly smaller. The space that you're able to see. So, but what I was very adamant about with Rick, our production designers, I said I don't want to have a CG set, but if I do that, I've done that before. I got one thing on set, and the rest of the surrounding stage, giant stage, and floor and ceiling are green. And when you do that, first of all, it literally gives you a headache. The green screen after enough hours gives you a headache. But it's tedious. It's hard for the actors to know what they're doing. And so what we did was the Cyclops system was a system by which we could digitally stitch together real photography. We went to Norway and shot all the materials for the gorge. We shot the rock walls, we shot the canyons, we shot the forest on the mountains, we shot the sky. You shoot all the waterfalls, you shoot all those materials, and you do it in such a way with a plan to come back and reconstruct them, sort of stitch them together into a virtual system. So by the time we were actually photographing our characters up on their balconies, for example, the dinner table, I could take the camera and frame it. I could do an over-the-shoulder shot over Miles on Anya, and I could see in the camera window exactly the virtual environment made of real photography. So if the gorge looks real, it's because it technically is. The material's real. It's not CGI material. Some of it's stitched together. But the great thing was being able to have a permanent placement for those things for consistency, so that every time you're shooting, you're always shooting the same kind of angles. Nothing's ever mismatched, and it's very liberating as a director and pretty thrilling. And what it allows you to do is to frame things. It lets you frame things more beautifully, but also it lets you get more size out of the frame, because you know when to use a long lens, when to use a wide lens, when you should compress it, when you should widen it out, and give a specific look to the movie. And that's a technology I've not used before. It was wonderful.
How long did it take you to film the scene where the Jeep was going up the cliff?
Oh God! If you ask Andy or Miles, I guarantee they'll remember. I think it was 5 days. I just remember at the end of it, Anya coming down from her cable up the end of it, and she kind of saluted. She goes, "Bye, wall." I could tell she's like had enough of it. But yeah, that was a long, tedious process, but all those, all the Hollow Men were virtual design characters. They were guys in suits, but we had designed a specific textural reality for each one of those specifically. So a lot of stunt work on that shot.
What about the shot where Miles first goes across the gorge to see Anya for the first time?
On the zip line?
The zip line, yeah.
Oh, yeah, he really did a zip line. I mean, he was, we had him up, he wasn't, 600 meters above the ground or anything like that. But yeah, it was all real zip line work, and he was really, hoisting himself back on a cable and detaching all that stuff. So it's like there's a lot of visual effects in the movie, but the best visual effects movies never win Oscars because you don't know they're visual effects movies. You know, the ones that are really good, you just don't know. And on this one, there's plenty in there that you know you're looking at visual effects, but I definitely think that anybody who's any good at visual effects, especially the best visual effects producers, they'll all tell you if you shoot it real, it will look better. You know, so as long as you're sort of committed to that and not falling back on any CGI that and you also have to understand, and this is the thing I'm proud of with Doctor Strange. There's so much CGI visual effects in Doctor Strange that if you are going to embrace it like that, the trick of it is to acknowledge what visual effects do well and what they don't. And what visual effects do well is tactile material, tactile surfaces. So even though there's like in Doctor Strange, even though there's all this magic, there's no amorphous light. You know, when you see those visual effects, part of your brain just goes CGI. You know, but when they make when they make portals, they look like sparks. They're welder sparks. You know, they have a tactile energy to them. You feel like you know what they would feel like if you touch them. And so in any movie, for me, that's always the thing I try to avoid is anything that's giving the audience surface textures that are not instinctively familiar to them. Because anytime you see those in the movie, you know it's not real.
When I was watching too, I just felt like, why do I feel like this is the most creative freedom you've had on a film? Is that fair to say? Because like, it's just, again, this the blending of the genres and the shifting of the tones. I mean, it's a very most ambitious film that I've seen you do yet.
Well, I had Final Cut on Sinister, so that's the winner. But no, I've been really, honestly, I've been really fortunate. I've had great creative freedom in my career. You know, people like to knock Marvel. I don't think they knew what to do with Doctor Strange, and I really felt like I did, and they really backed me. They let me make that movie. You know, on the horror films I made for Blumhouse, Jason Blumhouse Final Cut on Black Phone never gave me a note.
Wow.
You know, this movie, David Ellison, Skydance, those guys are movie lovers. They love cinema. David Ellison loves movies. He just bought Paramount. I hope that's great for the movies. But that's a guy who really cares about movies. Their team, Dana and Don. Those are people. It's just everybody just wants to make the best movie. So I never have been in a situation where I've been very fortunate. I have not been in a situation where I felt like I had to compromise anything really. I don't think I've ever had a director's cut. Maybe on Emily Rose, but I don't even think that. Jerry Bruckheimer told me one time. He said, "I always have Final Cut. I've never used it, not once." And the whole idea is like, if you are making a movie, if you're working with a producer and a director and a studio, and the important thing is that everybody agrees. If you all know what you're making, everybody agrees on the movie you're making. If everybody understands, then that conflict doesn't happen. You know, and if you find yourself in a situation where, I think the movie I'm making is not the same movie the producer wants to make, or the same movie the studio wants, that's when you've got to leave. You know, because when that happens, the end result is going to be terrible, and I've been fortunate to avoid that. That's not true. I did have one movie I made where it went terrible. I blocked it out. We're not going to talk about that one.
You said you wanted this movie to feel like a drive-in, and it definitely has that feel. You know, how much fun did you have making The Gorge?
Oh man, it was an incredible experience. You know, it's bananas. It's outrageous. You know, and there was a feeling of like, are they really giving me this much money to put this on the screen? Did I get this kind of budget for this craziness? But I think that it was, I don't know, it was something about the unlikely pairing of like, if you can make zany's maybe too strong a word, but an outrageous, genre-bending, bold, crazy drive-in type movie like this, and have real heart and romance, and have some real serious ideas underneath. If you want to look for them, they're there. If you don't, that's fine. But if you put all that together, that's a good night at the movies for me, man. You know?
It's a great night at the movies, and until we get to see this in a driving, catch it, it drops on Apple TV Plus. What better way to celebrate Valentine's Day than with The Gorge? It drops on February 14th. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.